On the surface, the headline numbers don't look like a disaster. The official unemployment rate is hovering around 4.1%, close to where it's been for more than a year. Prime age workers, those between 25 and 54, are participating in the labour market at roughly 83 to 84%, near the highest levels seen since the early 2000s. Inflation has cooled from the post-pandemic spike and is running at roughly 3% a year, down from the peaks above 8%. If you looked only at those headlines, you might think, why are people fearing a recession? Why are people fearing a collapse? But when you dig a little deeper, the data starts to tell a very different story. A story of rising layoffs, fragile households, and an economy that increasingly depends on the spending of a small, wealthy slice of Americans. That is where the real risk lies, and why some economists are warning that this whole thing could start to unravel much faster than people expect. In this video, we're going to look past the political spin and the talking points and walk through what the numbers actually say. We'll break it down into three parts: what the official data really shows about jobs and unemployment, why the surge in layoffs is such a serious warning sign, how policy choices under Trump are making the system more fragile. Before we go further, it's important to say this: different economists interpret the same data in different ways. Some believe the US is heading toward a downturn, while others think the economy may be slow but avoid a full collapse. There's no universal consensus. By the end, you can decide for yourself. Are we looking at a stable economy or one that's quietly edging towards breaking point? Let's start with the official picture. According to the Bureau of Labour Statistics, the unemployment rate in mid-2025 sits at about 4.1%. It's been stuck in a narrow range of around 4 to 4.2% since the middle of 2024. That's higher than the absolute lows of the post-pandemic boom, but still low by historical standards. If you go one step deeper, the broader U6 measure, which includes people who are working part-time because they can't find full-time work, and those marginally attached to the labour force, is sitting a little above 8%. That's not catastrophic, but it's clearly weaker than the official headline suggests. Now add inflation to the picture. Consumer prices in the US are still rising at roughly 3% a year, and the Federal Reserve's preferred inflation gauge shows the same upward pressure. Personal consumption expenditures inflation is expected to be 2.7% over the 12 months ended in August 2025 and has been above the Federal Open Market Committee's 2% target since early 2021. This means that even though inflation has cooled from its peak, it remains noticeably above the Fed's goal. That means prices are still growing faster than the central bank would like. At the same time, interest rates remain high by recent standards as the Fed tries to squeeze out the last of the inflationary pressure. What does that combination mean in real life? It means a lot of families are living in the worst possible middle ground. They still have jobs, but the cost of living is significantly higher than it was a few years ago. And borrowing for a car, a home, or to refinance debt is more expensive too. Real wages have improved compared to the worst of the inflation surge, but for many households, the gains are modest and uneven. This is why you can have a strong labour market on paper, but at the very same time that 2/3 of workers tell pollsters they feel like they are living paycheck to paycheck. The averages hide the stress. A perfect example of this financial strain can be seen in the surge of car repossessions. Take a look at this article. Car repossessions are surging across the US as an increasing number of Americans fall behind on their auto loans. According to data from the Recovery Database Network analysed by CU Repossession, it is projected that over 3 million cars could be repossessed in 2025. This would be the highest number since the financial crisis. In the final 3 months of this year alone, the analysis predicts that 820,236 vehicles will be repossessed across the country, and millions more are at risk of losing their cars as they struggle to keep up with payments. The percentage of subprime borrowers, those with poor or no credit, who are at least 60 days late on their loans, was at 6.43% in August, according to Fitch Ratings. This figure has doubled since 2021 and is worse than during the dot-com recession, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the financial crisis. Economists are warning that this consumer weakness could be a warning sign that serious cracks in the US economy, which could lead to a financial meltdown. Now we need to talk about the number that really grabbed economists' attention: layoffs. Because of the government shutdown and delays in official data, investors and analysts have been forced to rely heavily on private sector reports. One of the most important of these comes from Challenger, Gray and Christmas, which tracks planned job cuts by US employers. Their latest figures are stark. Layoff announcements soared in October as companies recalibrated staffing levels during the artificial intelligence boom, a sign of potential trouble ahead for the labour market, according to outplacement firm Challenger, Gray and Christmas. Job cuts for the month totaled 153,074, a 183% surge from September and 175% higher than the same month a year ago. It was the highest level for any October since 2003. This has been the worst year for announced layoffs since 2009. Like in 2003, a disruptive technology is changing the landscape, said Andy Challenger, workplace expert and chief revenue officer at the firm. At a time when job creation is at its lowest point in years, the optics of announcing layoffs in the fourth quarter are particularly unfavourable. In total, companies have announced 1.1 million cuts this year, a 65% increase from a year ago and the highest level since the COVID pandemic year of 2020. October saw the highest total for any month in the fourth quarter since 2008. These are not just numbers on a spreadsheet. They are real people losing jobs in warehousing, retail, tech, media, transport and more. Companies are citing cost-cutting, softer demand, restructuring and, in a number of growing cases, the adoption of artificial intelligence as reasons for the cuts. Now, it's true that AI-related layoffs still account for a minority of the total, tens of thousands of jobs rather than hundreds of thousands. Most job cuts are still driven by old-fashioned economic pressure, slowing sales, higher costs and management trying to protect profit margins. But the direction is clear. Firms are trimming staff aggressively, and some of that is about replacing human labour with technology. When layoffs spike this sharply, especially late in the year when companies usually avoid making big cuts, is a classic sign that something in the engine of the economy is starting to misfire. Still, economists differ here too. Some see these cuts as the early stages of a contraction, while others interpret them as companies correcting overhiring from earlier years. Nonetheless, even with these differing interpretations, these levels of layoffs are undeniably concerning. And it's easy to understand why many Americans fear that a recession or even a broader economic collapse could be approaching. When more than 1 million job cuts are announced in a single year, when companies across multiple sectors are tightening their belts, and when households are already financially stretched, the margin for error in the economy becomes very thin. People look at rising repossessions, elevated interest rates, shrinking savings, and now widespread layoffs, and naturally conclude that the foundations of the economy may be weakening. Even if a collapse is not guaranteed, and many economists stress that it isn't, the warning signs are strong enough to make the fear understandable. Next, we need to talk about who is actually keeping this economy afloat. Over the last few years, the US has become more dependent than ever on the spending of the richest households. Recent analysis shows that the top 10% of Americans now account for roughly half of all consumer spending. Put simply, a small group of high-income households is doing a huge share of the shopping. The K-shaped economy, widely touted in the financial press, is the latest expression of wealth inequality. The US economy is experiencing a growing gap between the highest earners and the richest corporations, who are spending and expanding their wealth, and the lowest income households and mom-and-pop companies who struggle to pay their bills day to day. Following the second short-term interest rate cut on October 29th, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said, "A further reduction in the policy rate at the December meeting is not a foregone conclusion, far from it." He cited the Fed's ongoing concerns regarding inflation, employment, rising defaults in subprime credits, layoffs, and a bifurcated economy. If you listen to the earnings calls or the reports of big, public consumer-facing companies, many of them are saying that there's a bifurcated economy there and that consumers at the lower end are struggling and buying less and shifting to lower-cost products. But that at the top, people are spending at the higher income and wealth, Powell said. That, in a nutshell, is the K-shaped economy. For years, people have talked about political polarization. Democratic or Republican, left or right, conservative or progressive. Every election cycle, every debate, every news headline seems to widen that gap. Families argue across dinner tables. Social media is filled with verbal welfare. Politicians use division as a strategy because it energizes their base. And for a long time, America believed that this left versus right conflict was the biggest divide shaping the country. But what economists are now pointing out is far more unsettling. The real divide running through America isn't blue versus red, it's up versus down. It's not ideological, it's financial. Wealthy households are spending aggressively. Many Americans are pinching pennies, exhausted by high prices and stubborn inflation. The well-off are spending with abandon. The top 10% of earners, households making about $250,000 a year or more, are splurging on everything from vacations to designer handbags, buoyed by big gains in stocks, real estate, and other assets. Those consumers now account for 49.7% of all spending, a record in data going back to 1989. According to an analysis by Moody's Analytics, 3 decades ago they accounted for about 36%. All this means that economic growth is unusually reliant on rich Americans continuing to shell out. Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, estimated that spending by the top 10% alone accounted for almost 1/3 of gross domestic product. Between September 2023 and September 2024, the high earners increased their spending by 12%. Spending by working class and middle class households, meanwhile, dropped over that same period. While wealthy households are driving record levels of consumption, the story at the bottom looks completely different. In fact, many economists argue that lower income Americans are already living in a recession, even if the country, on paper, is not. The US economy is technically expanding, corporated profits are strong, and GDP reports continue to show growth. But those headline numbers hide a reality that millions of working class families feel every single day: falling purchasing power, rising debt, and the quiet squeeze of an economic downturn happening underneath the surface. For households earning under $50,000, and even many earning between $50,000 and $100,000, the combination of high prices, high rents, and high borrowing costs has pushed their budgets to the breaking point. Credit card delinquency rates are surging, auto loan defaults are rising, buy now, pay later usage has exploded, savings built up during the pandemic have evaporated. These families aren't choosing cheaper brands because they want to, they're doing it because they have no other option. In practical terms, their economic reality mirrors the classic sign of a recession: cutting back spending, delaying major purchases, cancelling travel, and prioritising essentials over everything else. Another piece of this story is timing. The recent federal government shutdown delayed some key economic releases, including certain labour market and inflation reports. That forced markets, businesses, and households to rely more heavily on private data, payroll processors, layoff trackers, and real-time surveys. Those private data sets have been sending a consistent message. The job market is slowing, layoffs are rising, hiring plans are being scaled back, and seasonal hiring is the weakest it has been in years. When the official data machinery comes back fully online and the backlogs are cleared, the numbers are likely to confirm what private sources already show: a cooling labour market, rising underemployment, and weak momentum. That delay matters because financial markets are often slow to acknowledge turning points, even with perfect information. When the data comes out late and in choppy batches, the risk is that investors, businesses, and policymakers wake up to the problem all at once, rather than gradually. Think of it like driving a car at night with your headlights dimmed and the speedometer slightly delayed. Everything looks fine until suddenly it doesn't. So, is collapse imminent? With a title like this, we have to be clear and honest. No serious economist can put an exact date on a collapse. Recessions are not clockwork. They're a result of pressures building up and then finally breaking something. Confidence, credit markets, corporate balance sheets, or household finances. What we can say, based on the data, is this: unemployment is still relatively low, but broader underemployment is meaningfully higher. Prime age participation is strong, yet overall participation is weak and the workforce is ageing. Inflation has come down from its peak, but is still above target, with tariffs and policy choices adding upward pressure on prices. Layoffs have surged to their highest levels in years, especially in October, signalling that companies are preparing for tougher times. Consumer spending is increasingly propped up by the richest households, while lower-income Americans are cutting back and taking on more debt. This is not a picture of an economy in freefall today. It's a picture of an economy that has serious issues that need to be addressed. If layoffs remain elevated, if wage growth slows while prices and borrowing costs stay high, and if the wealthy finally pull back on spending, the risk of a recession, or at least a painful slowdown, rises sharply. When people talk about imminent collapse, what they usually mean is that the ingredients for a downturn are increasingly present. A labour market that's losing steam, households that are financially stretched, corporate America shifting from hiring to cutting. On all of those fronts, the economy is moving in the wrong direction. On paper, the Trump economy can still be sold as strong, low unemployment, solid customer spending, and stock markets that, for now, remain elevated. But beneath those headlines, the numbers are flashing warning signs: rising layoffs, slowing momentum, and an economy held up by a shrinking group of very wealthy households. If nothing changes, those pressures will keep building. And history tells us that when imbalances grow for long enough, they don't unwind gently. Whether or not we see an imminent collapse, one thing is clear: ordinary workers and families are already carrying the weight of a system that was never designed with them at the centre. If you found this breakdown helpful and you want more fact-based news, like, comment and subscribe for more.